Hello, hello. This is Justin Coletti of SonicScoop, and today we are debuting yet another new plugin on this channel. It is one that has just come out, and this one is based around the concept of space creation or space emulation, room and speaker emulation, particularly for headphones. It's made by Lewitt Audio. It's called Space Replicator, and this is kind of the newest iteration in a whole genre of tools that's out there for making headphones sound like real, convincing physical spaces, emulating speakers in fancy studios, and also emulating things like cars, nightclubs, earbuds, iPhones, laptops, and the like. Are these tools really useful for mixers, producers? Who are they most useful for? What are the potential benefits? We'll be exploring all that and a whole bunch more with Moritz of Lewitt Audio. And we're going to be talking about some unique things that are in here because, Moritz, I think there's at least one thing in this plugin that is done differently than any other company making plugins in the genre. And I think there's at least one feature that you have here that no other plugin in the genre yet has. So we'll talk about that and a whole bunch more. We'll be taking questions from you guys live as well. Moritz, thanks so much for joining us here on the SonicScoop channel.
Happy to be here.
All right, so real quick, Moritz, I'm going to give my quick pitch for why this kind of thing might be interesting, and then I want you to expand a little bit on. I want to ask you a whole bunch of questions so we can get to the bottom of this. We do have the Pro Tools screen, or in this case, Logic screen, pulled up here so we can look at this thing together in real time and actually hear some sounds and go through the process of improving the sound of this for your specific headphones. But my big pitch here is I've become a big advocate in recent years of headphone mixing, particularly for new and intermediate producers and mixers, or even experienced ones who are working in home studios, because in the past 5 to 10 years, it is the first time where I think if you're going to spend somewhere between $400 and $4,000, you could probably get better results at any of those price points through headphones than room or speaker treatment. Like the kinds of results you could get out of headphone mixing for $400 these days, you'd have to spend at least a couple $1,000s, I think, in room treatment and speakers to get comparable results on. And this is very new. But speakers and rooms sound very different than headphones, and they can lead you to make different types of choices. So this idea of room and speaker emulation is a potential positive. But there's also this idea of correcting headphones to a target curve to get better results and better frequency response out of them. And we'll talk a little bit about a concept called HRTF, or head-related transfer function. That sounds too jargony. Don't worry, we're going to break it apart because I think you guys do something really interesting around that with this plugin. Before we get too much more into those details, Moritz, does that overall sense, did I describe what this is trying to achieve, and who do you think this kind of tool is best suited for?
Yeah, I think well described. I think it does two things that you need when you work with audio, when you do mixing, mastering, any sort of work with audio. You need a reliable acoustic environment to make your decisions so that, well, you can judge really what you're doing. And that's usually done in a professional, well-treated studio room, which not everybody has access to. And this is one aspect what this plugin does for you. So the headphones you already have, you can emulate different studios with them. And then the other thing is you want to know how you mix sounds somewhere else. Because most of the music listening doesn't happen actually in recording studios. And I'm sure, well, I've been definitely in that situation that you, especially when you start out, you mix all night, you're super excited, happy. Next day you want to, show it off to your friends on a Bluetooth speaker or in a different acoustic environment, and suddenly it sounds not as awesome as you had imagined it from the day before, because it doesn't translate really well. And I mean, the audio engineers did a lot of I guess the car check, for example, is a classic, right? You bring your mix to your car. But here we can do even more, because by a click of a button, we can switch between, a living room with a smartphone. You can check how your sound, your mix sounds in the club, in different environments, on a TV, and of course, how it sounds in the car.
Right, very cool. Now, this kind of technology this isn't the first iteration of this kind of technology. There's other brands that have done it, but I think the very first time that I became aware of this, it was with companies where they bundle together a pair of headphones with a software solution, and the software is kind of paired to the headphones. And it was a relatively inexpensive pair of closed back headphones with not the greatest transient response. I think one of the things I like about third parties like you guys doing it, where it's not tethered to a particular pair of headphones, is one, I can choose the headphones that I like, both style, comfort, fit, and sonically, and then apply both headphone correction or room to just any headphones, the ones that suit me best. So I think that's one big advantage here. But then there's this other potential advantage of really creating a customized target curve for the end listener. And I think one of the things here that people aren't aware of is that there's no such thing as flat headphones. I've recently done a podcast episode about that. If you measure any pair of headphones, put a measurement mic next to the end of it, you're not going to see a flat response. And that's because our ears are wildly skewed. Meaning, if we play really nice high-end sounding speakers in a really nice, well-treated room, our ears then apply an EQ curve to that sound coming into our ears. And what's actually applied to it is a big boost, maybe around 3K from the shape of our outer ear. There's maybe a boost around 100 hertz from the shape of our head and shoulders. So when we take our ears and our head and our shoulders out of the equation and we pipe sound right in with headphones, all of that normal filtering that our ears do goes away. So we almost have to recreate that for headphones with some type of EQ curve. And headphones will have some type of EQ curve built into them to approximate what it sounds like to listen to speakers in the room. The big problem here, though, is that all of us have differently shaped heads. Me and Moritz, I'm sure if we stood next to each other, we're different heights, we have different shaped heads, we have different sized ears, and these one-size-fit-all solutions to creating a good target curve aren't always optimal. But you guys have come up with a way to kind of get around this. Am I explaining this concept decently well? Is there anything you add to this? And what's been your unique solution that's not yet in other tools in this class that you've seen out there?
I think there are two separate concepts that are very similar, but important to separate. Mm-hmm. So one is the target curve of the headphone itself. And, famously, Harman did a lot of research into that topic, this Harman target curve that has been approximated by, I think, the most headphones out there, exactly to get a flat sounding profile onto headphones like you would experience it via a studio. And what we are doing with the headphone compensation files that we have in Space Replicator, there are about 600 compensation files. We want to kind of remove completely the different headphone target curves from the equation of creating these virtual acoustic spaces. So that's one part. We want a consistent headphone. We want to remove that headphone from that equation. So it doesn't matter that yours and my headphones sound differently. Within Space Replicator, they are matched, so they sound, as transparent as possible.
Can you show us that menu really quick in there, Moritz?
Yeah,
just
sure.
that idea of first, we're removing the type of filtering that's being done by these headphones. So you have a list, there's almost 600 here, my goodness. Bear Dynamic, there's a whole dozens of them just under Bear. So you can search by brand in here. You've got Head. I think I saw Apple here, so you could even potentially use this with earbuds. So yeah, I can grab my headphones on this list, and it is basically going to try to take that out of the equation. So that's step number one. And then what's the step number two you're starting to get to?
So step number two is how we perceive sound in a room. And sound travels from all sorts of different directions, and there are cues that our brain uses. For example, the different loudness. If something is, louder on the right side, or if a sound comes from the right of me, it's louder on the right ear than on the left ear. But it also travels over my head, so there's a delay between the right and the left ears. And there are even more cues. For example, you can imagine if a sound comes from the back or from the front of you, it's the same level, left and right. It's the same delay. There's no delay between left and right ear, yet you can identify where it comes from. And that is basically because of your head-related transfer function. And let me bring up an image here to illustrate that, maybe.
Please.
So this colorful circle in the center, that's your head. Mm-hmm. And all those dots are individual measurement points. So when you go to a lab to get your HRTF measured, you would have individual frequency responses from sound traveling into your ears from all those directions. And it's important to have a very accurate, very human head-related transfer function, so that if you emulate, real acoustic spaces, that you get the same cues that you personally would get in the space, not someone else's or something that's very generic like a dummy head.
Right. And to my understanding, that's how most other brands who make these tools have set up a lot of their room speaker emulations. They take a dummy head that's supposed to be the average person. And I've met very few average people in my life, but you take the average person, their dummy head, you put it in the room, and then they capture the sound through that dummy head, hoping that my shape of my ears and head and all that is close enough to the dummy head. But you guys have taken a radically different approach, and it lets us do something very different. I don't want to bury the lead here, so I'm going to kind of give a little spoiler, which is that you are able to go through a really simple several-minute process that kind of gets a really, really good picture of my unique head-related transfer function. And you do that without the crazy testing that has made the idea of getting your own head-related transfer function measured so daunting for so long. Some of the process in the past has been you get people into a room and then you maybe take measurements of their head, or maybe you get them into a listening space and do some tests in a special type of studio that they'd go to. Or I've seen people trying to shortcut this by having maybe an iPhone that takes a picture of your ear and it makes guesses about the frequency response. But you guys have a very simple, it's almost like going to the optometrist, where I play audio examples and it goes, better like this or better like this, better like this or better like this. And after I go through that process, just by me giving input of which of these sounds more realistic, you're able to get a shockingly good version of head-related transfer function. And really quick, before we talk too much more, in the next couple minutes, I want to get into some audio examples of both taking us through that process, because it's so easy. And then I want to play for people some of these spaces before and after. So hold on really quick for some audio examples. Before we get there, you did something very differently in creating this tool, different from other plugin companies, that allows this to happen. So you did not just put a dummy head in the room. What did you do differently to make this possible, and why is that important?
From the start, it was very important to us that we can separate all the different elements once we created them. So you can imagine if you take a simple impulse response with a dummy head microphone, everything is baked into that already. The speakers, the room, and also the listener. So you cannot be really, you cannot really personalize it all that well afterwards. So we wanted to have all those elements separately. So what we are doing, we created a special capturing method where we capture, we go to a real physical place, real acoustic environment, turn it into a high resolution virtual capture that understands how the sound waves traveled over time in that space. And then it's rendered through your personalized binaural profile. All those dots you saw, they are individual frequency responses from different reflections from within the room. So if you don't have that information separately and over time, you cannot really recreate it in a personalized way. And it also allows us to do a lot of stuff we can go into afterwards, where if you capture a music club, it's almost impossible to capture it with people inside. But because we have this model, we can model also how it would sound with people inside. So it's a really flexible system that could be expanded into various ways in the future. And Space Replicator is just the first, user-facing product of the technology.
Right. So this is interesting. Yeah, if we were to take a dummy head and put it in a club, and we're having the coloration and the time cues of that dummy head already, it's going to be hard to put in additional processing and additional modeling that would then model what effect bodies have in that space. But because you're doing this with a raw capture of the room, getting the dummy head out of the equation, and then applying the dummy head later using not just a random average dummy head, but a model of my dummy head, my own dumb head. You're measuring this by doing the audio optometrist thing, and then you put a model of my head in the space. Then you're able to do additional processing that some other tools like this can't do. So I think that's one of the big breakthroughs here. And I want to walk people through the audio optometrist process. I'm going to try it with my headphones. I'm wearing a relatively obscure pair of headphones, maybe, so we'll see if it's in there. So this is going to be, maybe I'll even catch you off guard. But before we get there, can you just play us really quick some of the more interesting before and after examples of just raw, dry sound and then emulating for... Right now, we have like an average profile in there, and maybe it's your profile, Moritz. So this isn't going to be perfect for people listening at home because it's not taking into account your unique headphones, your unique head, which is something that you can do with Space Replicator. So I recommend you go and download the free trial so you can get an even better sense, getting an even more realistic picture by taking your head and your headphones into account. But right now, Moritz is just going to play us some of these averages and give us just a general sense of what this tool does.
Yeah, happy to do so. Just jump in and interrupt me if I go on too long or too short. So I think let's just turn it off first. I'll play you the sound sample. One thing with headphone sound is that it feels like it's really inside your head. It doesn't feel like it's coming from the front of you. So if we turn on a Space Replicator, you get a more natural stereo field and the sound jumps out. And again, I'm using the default headphone profile and the default binaural profile. So it's the most accurate for the most people. So now it jumped a bit to the front, and you notice it especially when you pan a track, for example.
Yes.
Sounds that come just from the left on headphones don't even reach your right ear. But here it's different, and when I turn it off, it will be even more obvious.
Yes, with that left pan guitar.
So yeah, for everybody listening, it's good to wear headphones now. This is another awesome studio space synchron stage, Vienna synchron stage. And there we can also switch between different playback systems. And we were talking about these HRTF cues of when it changes height or direction. And you can just feel it jumping upwards when you switch to the main speakers, or the far field speakers. You could really feel like how the sound moves up.
And also the width of field.
A lot of people listen on a smartphone to music, believe it or not. And now I feel scared because I feel like did my audio routing now suddenly go through the laptop in front of me?
Yeah, this is honestly the most persuasive one so far. Yeah, like I feel like I could have a phone on my desk.
And we have a bunch of different playback devices to choose from. Well, this is a laptop with better speakers, or just an office laptop. What's also really nice, the different qualities of different like professional studio spaces. So this one is White Sea Studio, and it's really super precise and intended for long working sessions. Another really nice and clean sounding room.
Yeah, there's a kind of mellowness and a controlled character to it. Yeah.
Exactly. Now we can go to the club.
And here you hear the width of the space. Like, it's not the width of the speakers. It's almost, the speakers are a little bit more mono, but you hear the reflections off the walls behind you and to the sides. Like, it really gives me this enveloping feel.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a bunch of locations. So DJ booth. And hopefully nobody will have to perform it in an empty club. So that's where this modeling of speakers, of humans, comes into play.
hear that. It becomes more direct once there's bodies in there soaking up some of the reflections. Yes. But I still get that sense of some of the sound is coming from behind me in the club.
It's still bouncing around all over the place, all the reflections. Then we have a car, of course, you gotta have a car. Even different speaker positions, or like passenger positions.
The one thing no one has modeled yet is me listening to the mix in my driver's seat and then leaning to try to hear the stereo balance into the middle. So if you could give me a head lean option, that'd be fun.
Maybe in the future. We'll make a note of it.
Sure.
TV. Sounds awful.
Yeah. And I really hear the room, and the room is asymmetrical. That was something else I noticed with your living room model when you had like an acoustic, almost like an acoustic mono speaker. If you go back to that living room with the small set of speakers. Or the kitchen. Yeah. So this, it's like almost acoustic mono in the center, but then I hear the reflections on the walls around me. And the space seems somewhat asymmetric. Oh, such a different profile.
Yeah. It's also interesting on the TV. You can switch between the TV and the soundbar, and the difference couldn't be more drastic.
Yeah. So boxy. I mean, honestly, this is fun even just as like a listening test to like acclimate ourselves to really tune into what different environments sound like, even just as a educational tool. Or even to quiz yourself, like close your eyes and have your friend change and say, what kind of space am I in? And see if you can figure that out for yourself.
Yeah, maybe back to something a bit more hi-fi, like nice sounding spaces. Mm-hmm. That's the Lewitt Studio B in our office. That's a super dry room. I really like to use this room for like editing, voice, these kind of things.
But you can hear the low end is imperfect in the way it would be in a room this size.
Vienna Synchron Stage B. I think this is also it was surprising to us because starting out you would assume, well, and it's also true, all those studios are high quality, so how different will they sound? And they all sound different because they were built for different purposes. I think the best example is Vienna Synchron Stage A. So for people not familiar with the Synchron Stage, they produce a lot of movie scores. They can record like 100-piece orchestra in there. So they have very particular requirements on being able to hear these low frequencies really well in some of those instruments. And it's a bit more roomy also, these far-field speakers. It probably wouldn't be great to edit some voice there, but it's perfect for editing and mixing movie scores.
Now, one other thing that's worth mentioning here, there's some comments coming in here, and some positive ones, some funny ones, and a good question that I want to bring up here. So I'm going to move to some audience questions. So just to go through some of the comments, Eastern Souvenir says, I really like the Vienna Synchron Stage, especially the midfields in Studio A. Eastern Souvenir says, I wonder whose kitchen this was modeled after. It does look like a very nice kitchen. And Joe Schmo unfortunately deleted his comment, but I remember what it said. It was, you've got to pan instruments more to the right to drown out your wife talking in the kitchen model. So I thought that was interesting. But let's go on a little bit further. Delta 9 says, this is kind of interesting, but I'd rather mix on my reference monitors any day. And I'd like to speak to this caveat here and offer some ideas. So for me, will I see this kind of thing, like going into additional rooms as my primary reference? I'm also skeptical for myself whether I would use a model of a high-end studio as my primary reference However, there's a couple of things that this does that speak to me personally. One is the test on different phones, tablets, earbuds, that kind of thing, I think is absolutely worth the price of admission on these. Checking them out in spaces like clubs, I think could be extremely interesting. So for me, the lo-fi spaces are a little bit more interesting. But the other thing that's potentially useful here is any software that can do this can do headphone correction as well. So you have the ability to emulate other types of headphones and things like, I believe, earbuds, or even just trying to get us to a really neutral headphone reference that is based not on an average, like almost every other company who makes headphone correction software does, getting a flat curve that is based on my unique head-related transfer function with a relatively easy way to get my head-related transfer function. Please.
Let me jump in here real quick. So these two concepts need to be separated a bit.
Yes.
So one is the target curve of the headphone, and for emulating other headphones, it's just the different target curves being corrected and applied again to match other headphones. The personalization is only required or relevant for creating these virtual acoustic spaces that simulate real acoustic environments, because the sound travels all over those spaces and comes into your ear from different positions and is filtered by your ears from those different positions. Whereas emulating other headphones, you just need to know the target curve from the headphone that you're currently using, flatten it out, and then apply the target curve of the other headphone. And those two things are kind of very similar concepts, but separately, to view them separately.
Right. I understand what you're saying, that if we were emulating going from the headphones that I'm wearing now to a pair of earbuds, you don't need to know my head-related transfer function. You would need to know the sound of my headphones and the sound of the target headphones. However, if we were trying to get to a truly transparent curve where we're not trying to emulate any specific headphones, I think having a head-related transfer function involved would be the ideal, because what is the reference flat curve we're shooting for? Because
I can also speak to that.
Yeah, please.
So we made actually extensive studies also what is an ideal headphone target curve. And we're also building on a wealth of research in that topic. A lot of it was done by Harman, and it's a pretty nerdy topic, but we always came back to something pretty similar to the Harman target, and slightly different, that is explained by just different measurement systems or the way how open back and closed back headphones are measured a bit differently. So what we have here, the transparent headphone profile, is what we ended up with after our own listening panel, and is basically just an emulation of an ideal headphone. So the difference between the transparent profile and here the H700 profile is just a different frequency response, and the head-related transfer function is not in use here.
Okay. All right. Understood. So you've come up with what you believe to be an ideal transparent pair of headphones. Not in this case, this is the one place where the head-related transfer function isn't used, but when we go to spaces, that's where the head-related transfer function becomes more key, essentially. Can we hear, just for giggles, some of the different headphone options here to go between? Now, this isn't going to be ideal for people listening at home. Again, if you are listening on headphones, great, but we don't have your target curve in. But just to give people a taste of the general idea, we'll do that. And then let's go through the process of creating your own head-related transfer function. I think that could be really interesting.
So yeah, first step would be to select your headphone from the list. And then you go over to headphones, and we can start with the transparent one. Obviously, it won't function for your headphones right now.
It's so interesting to hear these headphone models, because after listening in your room emulation for so long, the panning sounds so off to me on headphones. Everything sounds so wide and so weird now.
Yeah. These kind of tools, they grow on you. So after you use them and you spend some time in Space Replicator, after 5-10 minutes, and then you turn it off, and it just feels really, really strange.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the width, it just gets tucked in. Wow. So much more murky. Great. Now, just to speak a little bit more to some of the questions that are coming in, one person said, I believe it was at Delta 9, who said, this is interesting, but I'd rather mix on my reference monitors any day. There's a couple things here. One, you're assuming that the average person that this is targeted for has really high quality reference monitors in a really well-treated room. If you already have a room like some of the ideal studios being modeled here, maybe you're better off just knowing your room and focusing on mixing inside your room. And you'd be using this for the lower quality environments to model that. And that's why it's worth the price of admission. But for those of us who don't have great rooms, you could say, well, why not just learn to your headphones really well and learn to mix in those? And the answer is absolutely you can. But do you really know how your panning choices translate to other environments? And there you could use a lower quality environments like cars and living rooms and all of that. But this is where it might make sense to say, no, I want a model of a nice, well-treated room, nice speakers in it. So now I can say, I've done my mix primarily in my headphones, but I want to make sure all of my panning choices and my balances on pan instruments make sense when heard in a good quality environment. So I think for the average headphone user who doesn't have a great room, the models of really nice rooms are essential to double check panning choices. And for the user who does have a really nice room, maybe the high-end rooms aren't as attractive, but the low-end rooms become extremely attractive. Do you think that that makes any sense to you, or can you imagine additional use cases or ideal users for this kind of software?
Like, this is one of the things where everybody gets a very different value out of it. So if you have a perfectly treated studio, absolutely. I mean, mix in your awesome studio. I mean, that's obviously ideal, right? Of course. But then you can use Space Replicator maybe when you mix on the go, when you don't have your studio with you, or you can use it to check how your mix will translate to other spaces, like the club, like the car. If you make electronic dance music, well, the club is going to be more valuable to you than if you make music that's not usually played in clubs. So I think people will find interesting use cases for them. And the most surprising for us was during the alpha testing phase, we also distributed the product to non-audio engineers, people who just like music. And we found that they were among the most excited ones. And they would just completely route all their audio from their computer through Space Replicator just to get a more natural sound on their headphones without ever intending to use it for mixing or mastering. So I think it will be very interesting to see why people use it. And I think there are going to be a million different stories why people find different aspects of them useful.
And another theoretical thing that I don't know if you have the functionality for, but could be added in the future is on the on-the-go situation, rather than modeling someone else's room, could I use the technology in Space Replicator, at least in theory, to model my own room and take my own room with me on the go?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah. I think currently the process is not, the process of capturing such a space currently is not something that can be outsourced to an end user right now. But it definitely could in the future. And I think that would be, I mean, that's one of the things we heard quite often. Can you come and capture my studio? Because I would like to have my studio with me when I travel. And we would definitely want to do that in the future.
Very cool. At the very least, you could have a studio away from home where if you're traveling and you prefer the sound of mixing on speakers that doesn't have the incredibly artificially wide panning, you could at least in your own studio get to know the translation between your headphones and what you're hearing in the modeled space. And then you listen to your real space, and then you listen to the modeled space and headphones. And then you have a basis for comparison between, say, your favorite model in this. So then you've heard them back to back enough in your own space that you understand the translation between the two. And then you take this modeled space with you when you travel. Being able to compare it to a nice room gives you an even better basis for comparison. So I want to get through a couple of questions here and see if we can answer them. And then I want to walk people through this really easy, really simple, kind of fun process of creating your own HRTF and really customizing this to you. Because again, I think those are the two most unique things that you guys have going on, is that you have separated the head modeling from the capture process so that you can incorporate the unique facets of my head. And then to model my head, you're doing it in, I think, the most user-friendly way that I have seen, and apparently has some pretty good results. Before we get through that process, let's hear a few more questions and comments from the audience. Martin Blackman says, will this emulation cross-feed? So obviously these emulations have some cross-feed in them, meaning that signals that go to the right ear, as soon as you're listening in a room, they'll go to the right ear and left ear to some degree. But maybe Martin's question is, can I just do some cross-feed without the room emulation? Is that something that is in Space Replicator?
What we do is we go to places and capture real acoustic environments and then turn them into virtual acoustic environments that you can listen to on headphones. So currently there's no functionality built in that is, let's say, a simple crossfeed kind of tool. Mm-hmm. What we can do, and what we actually did for research purposes for now, and maybe we make it available in Space Replicator, is create synthetic rooms. So we could model like artificial rooms. So currently they're all real spaces that really got captured, but we can also model spaces and change the properties of those spaces to have minimal effects on the sound. You could imagine an anechoic chamber or I don't know, a set of speakers outside, right, where there are no reflections or very limited amount of reflections, that would lead to such a similar result where it's minimally altered the sound by the room, but you get a bit of you lose a bit of the unnaturalness of listening through headphones in terms of in-head localization and these kind of things.
Sure, that makes sense. I'm going to keep on reading both nice things and some of the tough questions because I think they're going to come up eventually. So let's get them here. Feudal Recording says, I tried the Space Replicator demo and it was great. However, the CPU load was a problem for me. I have Slate VSX and the Space Replicator used much more CPU power than VSX did. So there might be an issue there with maybe there's some additional CPU load compared to slightly less sophisticated things where the model is all captured. They're doing the head model. I guess one of the benefits of having a head capturing and hoping that that head is close enough to your head is that there's less additional math happening after the fact. Because you're doing a model of my head, there's a little bit of additional math that has to happen to take your modeled space and combine that with my modeled head in the software. So slightly higher CPU usage. Do you have thoughts and comments about CPU usage and how powerful of a system do I need to safely run this as part of a full session? Is that a trade-off that you're aware of, and is it a trade-off that you think is worth it?
Yeah, so I think we brought down the CPU load quite a bit. And so not to be too nerdy and too much in the details, but the model gets kind of rendered once you select the room, binaural profile, and headphone, and gets baked into a more like stable or a bit more static version. So we don't do all the rendering all the time, if that makes sense. So the result is that the CPU load is comparable of a stereo impulse response reverb. So it should be along those lines. Yeah. In our version, where we could change all parameters and everything at any given time, including head rotation, all those kind of things, where we have the real full model running, that would require a lot of CPU load. But I think Space Replicator is relatively light on the CPU load, so I wonder if there maybe be a very particular set of coincidences that leads to that. We can definitely look into it and definitely also reach out to our customer support in case something feels off, and we'll definitely look into it.
Well, it could be just the difference, like the average convolution reverb, impulse response reverb, is going to have a higher CPU load than the average algorithmic reverb. And that might be the kind of difference that he's noticing, is that we're comparing something that uses as much CPU as the basic convolution reverb, and comparing that to something that uses as much CPU as a basic algorithmic reverb. And yeah, that might be considerably more. You might be using even 2 or 3 times more CPU, but is that meaningful on a kind of plugin where you only use one instance ever? It's not like you're going to put Space Replicator in every track, right? It would be like using one convolution reverb that's a main reverb and you're sending many tracks to it. Same concept here. You're using one tool that is maybe slightly higher CPU usage than a similar tool that has simpler architecture, but that even if you had a 50% or 100% increase in CPU, the fact that you're using only one and the fact that it is similar CPU usage to a convolution reverb makes that extremely justifiable, compared to if it was like an EQ that you're supposed to put on every channel. That because there are some brands, I won't name them by name right now, that make very nice EQs that are super power hogs, and you can only use like one of them in your whole session. Here, this is a kind of tool where you're only expected to use one in your whole session, and the CPU usage is not crazy, but maybe more than a much simpler version of the same kind of thing, if that makes sense. So,
and one thing that
makes some sense of it.
Usually would use it for mixing, where you can increase the buffer size a little bit.
Right.
It is very low latency, so theoretically, well, I don't know, if you want to maybe play synths in the club in real time, that would be doable. But yeah, then we would need to lower the buffer size of the DAW to get that real-time benefits.
I also think of this day and age, if you have CPU usage issues when you're mixing on your computer, just get like a new computer. Oh my goodness, you can get like $1,000 computer these days that like almost never runs into CPU usage challenges. But I definitely understand the kind of person who uses an 8-year-old computer, because that's often me, and I'll like finally change it out after way too many years. But I just recently bought a new computer and I was amazed at how much cheaper it was than my last one, and like I never run into any issues. And yeah, it's sometimes the upgrade is finally worth it. But again, if we're talking about similar to a convolution reverb, we're not talking about excessive CPU usage at all. So let's go on a little further. This is an interesting question from Andres, who asks, what advantages would this offer versus a separate EQ correction and crossfeed plugin? So there are some plugins that are a little bit more focused on not doing a room emulation, but just trying to do some EQ correction and adding some crossfeed. So you have the sound of your headphones brought more in line with a maybe better target curve, and then doing some crossfeed. What advantages does this approach have over that approach in your mind?
Ultimately, I think it's a question of choice and preference. What we try to do is to recreate real acoustic spaces on the headphones you already have. So that's why the Lewitt Space Replicator is really focused on this. We have stuff in there that's similar to what was described in the question, from the headphone profiles, where you select your headphone and then you correct it towards a very transparent target curve. But we are not doing any sort of simple crossfeeds or something like this. And as I mentioned before, I think that could be an interesting exercise or experiment for us to build a space, a synthetic space, if you will, that gives a similar sound that people who are very familiar or really like these kind of crossfeed tools would feel right at home with, but with an added immersion.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. Feudal Recording says, headphones take your room out of the equation, so unless you have a perfect room and top-notch monitors, mixing in headphones does have some advantages, particularly with a system like this. I think you totally get the idea here, Feudal, absolutely. Let's see. Mo Green says, this is the least phasey algorithm I have tried so far. So that's great to hear, and I think part of that probably is you might have, in my opinion, a superior approach to modeling, but also for a lot of people, they're going to experience this as being the best version because you can tune it to yourself. I still want to go through that process in just a second. This person still feels like he doesn't always feel the sound coming from front center, but for panned instruments, it's more apparent. I'm not sure if I totally understand the question here, but he's saying that for panned instruments, it's more apparent, but don't always feel in these kinds of emulations, the sound coming from front center. I think I understand this. So sometimes when we listen on speakers, we get a very clear picture of phantom center. Like it almost sounds like there's a third speaker in the middle for centered elements. And I think what this person is saying, if I'm understanding the question right, this person feels like these kinds of tools are getting the sides right, bringing them in compared to headphones, but he doesn't get as solid of a phantom center as he does on real speakers. Do you think that is a difficult hurdle to overcome, or do you think you've gotten very close to it with this kind of tool? Is that a big challenge, or are there anything that you would have people focus on to try to get an even better phantom center out of tools like this?
I think we came very, very far. We came as close as we could to the real acoustic environment. But there are some differences in a real acoustic environment, cues that you don't have necessarily by not being in that room. And what I found when Space Replicator to me was the absolute most convincing was when I was actually in that room and then switched between the actual speakers in the room and Space Replicator via headphones. And there's a certain amount of, you know these, some people get that immersion really right away, and it feels like, well, it's jumping out of the headphones and it's really in front of me, like the sound stage. And I also get what the comment was about, that maybe the instruments pan to the right, they jump out more versus the ones in the center, because there are additional other cues when it's not in the center. But to me, it always is like, these images, these magic images where you stare at a picture and suddenly an image pops out in 3D. It's kind of magic eye kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. I know
it's a little bit like that. You need to immerse yourself a bit and let go and kind of, now I can really quickly jump in and out of those spaces, whereas early on, well, obviously we also, during the development time, we improved it massively. I think there's just a time element and a getting used to it, because it is unnatural, because you're not in that room, but it sounds like in the room, but other cues tell you, if you look around, you are not in that room. So there's still a lot of research to be done to understand better what helps in immersing yourself in those spaces, and it's a fascinating topic of research. And also, thank you very much for mentioning that it's minimal, like that. It's good in the phase response.
Yes,
because there's a huge challenge with these kind of tools to control, and we spend really a lot of effort into optimizing for this aspect.
Yeah, speaking on some of the stuff that, listening to you speak on some of the stuff is making me wonder if maybe some of the visual cues we get play into Phantom Center. And I like that idea you're talking about, relaxing your eyes helps you see a 3D image better. Is there relaxing your, getting to the state of willful suspension of disbelief will allow you to hear the cues better? Because one of the things that's happening is that there are visual cues that contribute to Phantom Center that might not be present when we're not visually immersed in a space as well. And I want to do some blind versus sighted listening tests on these for myself to see if that changes the image. That would be really interesting. So I really like the question. I really like some of the answers. And I also agree in what Mo here is saying about this being kind of the least phasey that he's heard here so far. I think you did that beautifully well here. Glove Bunnies jumps on that to say that Lewitt is really advancing the mic and room simulation game. I think it's forcing other companies to rethink how they approach their own products. I know Shure is working on their own system. Yeah, it seems so many folks are getting into this world. It's one of these things that seemed like maybe it would be a fad when it first came out, but the more that this technology is around, the more companies seem to adopt it and the more users seem to adopt it. And I'm not always an early adopter kind of guy. I'm kind of like a early to mid adopter. Like I don't just jump on any new bandwagon that comes. And when I first saw these types of tools, I thought, maybe this is one of these fad things. We'll see it and it'll disappear. But it simply has not disappeared, Moritz. There's more and more of these options, and more people are using them, and more people are telling me that they use a system like this to mix, and they're getting their best results out of ever out of their headphone mixes. So I think that is important to recognize.
There's also, I think these kind of tools are, well, massively mainstream by now. Let's look a bit further to mixing. I think Apple has something like this. I mean, it's not emulating other studios, but they have a spatial audio element that should help you, that the sound doesn't come from inside your head. Bose introduced stuff like this. Sony has stuff like this. So I think it's the more consumer audio type brands or big tech brands who have this, as well as from within the music production industry. And our Space Replicator can easily be adapted to multi-channel systems in the future. So yeah, I'm curious to see what happens in that space.
Sure. There's a couple of questions here. Someone writes in a super chat. Dan Tana gave a $5 super chat. Thank you so much. We'll move you up to the queue. He says, what do you think of the Waves NX room sims? I've heard them as well, and they're good. I think that they do something differently than these guys do, where, again, I believe they're using that dummy head approach, where it's not going to be uniquely modeled after your unique head-related transfer function. So it doesn't have that benefit. So if we're comparing these, apples to apples, I think that would be the biggest difference between the Waves approach and the Lewitt approach. But for that type of technology, they're also a good brand. There's a lot of good brands doing this stuff. But if we're comparing Lewitt to all of the other brands, I think that is one of the main standout features, is the way they're modeling the spaces and the way they're making it customizable. I still want to go through that process with you. Feudal Recording says, I have the NSX system and it's pretty good, but I never use it because it doesn't support my Odyssey headphones. Maybe they don't have as many headphones modeled as you guys. I'm not sure. You guys have about 600 headphones that are supported here. Bearcat says, what do we do if our headphones aren't on the list? How would I add a Subtonic Storm IEM, for instance? I've never heard of Subtonic Storm IEMs, so maybe it's an obscure brand. If someone has a really obscure brand of headphones that isn't on your list of 600, what would you recommend to that person?
There are really two ways to go about it. One is you can use the default profile, and most headphones are modeled after the Harman target. That's what they mainly try to achieve, is to reach the Harman target. So, and that's very close to the default headphone profile that we offer here. So if your headphone is, modeled like most headphones try to model after, then you can just use the default one and see how it sounds. The other option would be to write us a message, and we'll definitely collect all the requests for the different headphones. I think it's understandable that we cannot measure every headphone in existence, because measuring those headphones also means, in reality, getting not one but multiple of these headphones, because there are quite some production tolerances in headphones. Different brands have different tolerances, but it's important to measure multiple ones, and then you need to measure them on multiple cases, multiple receipts. So it's quite a process to do that. But if a model comes up often, I will definitely add it to the list.
Gotcha. All right. And I think that's it for unique questions for now. Before we let you go, you spent almost an hour with us here. I really appreciate your time today, Moritz. We took a really deep dive into this type of technology in general, as well as a specific tool. Can you take us through just the first few little bits of this process of making this software customized for me? How would I go about that, and what is that experience like?
So you click here on the binaural profile button. You brought to a website, and unfortunately the audio from that website will not be in the stream, because otherwise it would send also your voice back to you.
Gotcha. You have to do it in a different browser.
So that's a bit of a tricky situation here, but there's a free trial available, so everybody can give it a go. Then you select your headphone from the list. And again, this is as you can see, a pretty extensive list of headphones. So I hope most of you will find yours there. But for now, I'm just going to use the default one. And then look at the image and think, how would the stereo field sound like? And that's what we're looking for. And there are then 10 rounds of A/B samples. I'm going to play it here. Once you listen to both of them, you select which one is more accurate in terms of stereo width of that image that you see here than the other one. And then you just continue. And I'm going to just run through this really quickly.
Gotcha. So for each of these, I'm hearing a slightly different sounding audio example that has different frequency response and different sense for overall stereo width spatialization. And once I've taken this quiz, I've done 10 out of 10, it's going to create a profile for me. And I imagine I could create new or different profiles for myself for different headphones that I might have. Or if I feel like I don't love the results I got, I could just do it again if I was on the fence about question number 9 and kind of retake it with slightly different answers and see if the thing is, and this is much more, to my understanding, accurate than the idea of just taking a picture of my ear and making guesses based on the measurement of my ear. And I've heard, at least internally at Lewitt, you guys settled on this because you were surprised at how close this was to more involved systems of HRTF development, or HRTF testing, I should say. So yeah, extremely simple. And how close do you think this gets percentage-wise compared to doing a much more ornate process of determining appropriate HRTF for you?
So I have my HRTF measured in a lab and post-processed by our scientists here to be really the most accurate that's possible. Mm-hmm. I can also load that profile into Space Replicator. To me, it sounds like damn close. It's unlikely that anybody can, at scale, that we can offer people going to a lab. It's really a lengthy, complicated process. So to me, that's close enough. I don't even use my measured HRTF, actually. I use the one from the training. And maybe just to show how it works, it's the last step. You select then in the final round which ones you prefer overall. That includes timbre and other elements. Mm-hmm. Then you name it. And this is my second one I have here, so I name it like that. I save it. Then I go to the plugin. I click the sync button. And hopefully, if all goes well, it's not yet here.
Gotcha, because it is, you're
in, but yeah,
taking the test on the website and then assuming you're logged in with the same username, both on the website and the plugin, it'll load into the plugin and once you sync and you select it from there. I'm
logged in with a different user. I do a lot of testing, so it's a bit messed up right now. But trust me, it shows up here, and you can select it from here, and then you're good to go.
Sweet. Well, I recommend you guys download the demo and try this for yourself, if only for the fun of the process of going through this kind of A/B testing to get your own head-related transfer function. And just so you can hear whether or not you think this is worth the hype that I've been giving. I've been saying this is Lewitt's really groundbreaking thing here, the creating your own head-related transfer function file. You can decide whether or not that is worth it over other tools by trying this tool with and without your own head-related transfer function loaded and see if it makes a meaningful difference to you. And I'm pretty sure that the answer is going to be yes. So give that a shot, download. There's a free trial. I believe it's a 14-day free trial. Is that a fully featured 14-day full trial?
Yeah, you can do everything that the full version can do. You can do for 14 days. And I think on the binaural profile, also the default one is a very intricate profile. And it may be for some people that the differences between the trained one and the kind of default one are nuanced. For others, it's dramatic. So there's definitely a scale to how much difference you will hear, as well as for different headphones and different preferences overall.
Fair enough. It depends on how close you are to meeting the default average. And who knows, maybe the average user of this will say, it's not that big of a difference because I'm close to average. But for those of you who are really annoyed that none of these tools ever seem to get it right, maybe this is the one that'll get it right because you're far enough from the average that's going to make a big difference for you. So all that makes a lot of sense here to me. Thanks so much for showing this tool off. Right now, not only is there a free trial on it, but it comes totally free with Lewitt interfaces. We spent all this time talking about Lewitt without talking about the fact that you guys make some of the most attractive microphones from as low as around $100 to over $1,000. And I think you guys have killer options at every price point. That's what people should know you for. But also the Connect series of interfaces, really powerful. I believe a lot of them have DSP built in. We should get you guys on a conversation on this channel again one of these days to go over your whole gamut of microphones. I really love the idea behind the Ray microphone that you came out with recently, which is you mark it as having an autofocus for mics. But to keep this stream for under an hour, I think we're going to cut it here and have you guys come back. And I'd love to hear from you, Moritz, about the entire mic line to help people decide about Lewitt microphones in general. So check these guys out over at lewitt-audio.com.
Just one.
Yes, please.
Just one quick clarification. So this promo is on any Lewitt product you purchase in the month of May.
Oh.
So
sweet.
if you purchase from now or you check out our website, it's on the product pages or at your favorite retailer. You purchase any Lewitt physical product within that month, you get Space Replicator for free. So that's a limited time situation.
Beautiful. So not just the Connect interfaces. If you're going to check out the Lewitt mics, I have tried out many of them, including the 440 Pure, which is probably one of the best values of microphones out there. The mics that I've tried that I loved the most from Lewitt have been the 640 series, which I think are incredible value and great sounding mics, as well as the Pure Tube, which I thought was fantastic. It's a beautifully built mic, great sounding mic. I've used them here on the podcast in the past. So really can't say enough nice things about kind of price to value stuff on the Lewitt mics in particular. I have not yet tried the interfaces myself. I'd love to, but the feature set on them is really compelling, and the kind of overall aesthetic and build approach is very different from other interfaces out there, and I think very compelling and interesting. So Moritz, again, thank you so much for being on this channel. Thank you guys for being longtime supporters of the SonicScoop channel and sending me so many mics to try out in the past. I have loved all of them. And thank you guys for hanging out with us. This has been Justin Coletti of SonicScoop with Moritz of Lewitt's Audio, checking out the Space Replicator. See you next time.